if Freddy Krueger did not have his glove and it had to be replaced with something just very over the top and ridiculous, what would you replace it with to where he could go terrorize his victims?
I mean, I wouldn't say it's too ridiculous, but like, I was recently playing Batman Arkham Asylum, and Scarecrow's glove with the syringes on it was like, reminded me of very much like Freddy. Of like, that'd be horrible if he had that, but like, if you really want me to go super ridiculous, I guess you could say like, I don't know, like wet spaghetti with scalpels on it or something. I don't know.
Okay, I could just imagine him like having spaghetti fingers, like spaghetti noodle fingers, and just going around.
Like there's some pester ears going,
or lasagna noodles,
or maybe like that video Salad Fingers. I don't know if you remember that. Oh my gosh,
yes. I do.
Yeah, I guess that's probably, it probably doesn't get more ridiculous than that. Like,
I don't think it does. No. Hey everybody, how you doing? It is I, the Terrific Lady, otherwise known as Brandy, and welcome to Retro Horror School Talks, where I drag someone on here, kicking and screaming, to gush over what else? Retro horror. And with me today, my victim, is Jason, otherwise known as JaseInvader on Twitch. So, welcome, Jason. It is so good to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
Yes, so we are going to be talking about a very awesome horror movie that is very well known. But before we get into that, tell us all a little bit more about just who you are and what you do on Twitch or just wherever else.
So I am a streamer on Twitch, more of a hobby streamer, I guess would say. So I focus more on just having fun, meeting new people, talking about games. But my channel does focus on horror games because I love horror games. I do everything from retro horror to indie horror to more modern horror. And then I also play a lot of goofy stuff too with some horror elements. And then, yeah, we just have fun. I'm also on a stream team called the Clock Tower, another just great group of horror fans. And then, you know, we do a lot of collaborations, like from like marathons to like tabletop horror games and yeah, just a whole bunch of different stuff.
Now, I have to ask as a side question, since you are a horror gamer and like to play horror games, have any spooky games come across your plate recently where you've been like, this is creepy?
I did play most recently the new Silent Hill 2 remake, and they did change it up a lot to the point where it is a little bit more stress-inducing. Like with the new camera angle and everything, you can't really see as much. So that was pretty unsettling. But it was like, I mean, again, I'm not really bothered much by like a lot of horror. I'm very desensitized. So I just enjoy the atmosphere and like just the journey.
Yeah, it seems to be like the case with horror fans. We seem to be pretty case hardened and not a lot, like at least jump scares us.
Yeah.
So, I have to remember, the last like horror game I played was the Dead Space remake, which came out I think like last year, and I played the original, and I was like, well, the remake's not going to be like too much different. Nah, the remake still freaked me out as much as the original did.
Yeah, the remake was really good.
Yeah, it really, really was. And I could just sit here just talking about horror games, but I want to leave us some time to talk about you're here to talk about a horror movie. And let me go ahead and introduce your pick, which I asked, okay, you could pick any horror film from the 1970s through the 2010s, which are the eras I like to talk about. And You picked Nightmare on Elm Street, which came out in 1984. It is directed by Wes Craven at the time. He directed 5 films: The Last House on the Left, The Hills Have Eyes, Stranger in Our House, Deadly Blessing, and Swamp Thing, which is kind of out of left field there. It's like, and Swamp Thing. And it is the first movie in the franchise that totals 9 movies. One of the first films produced by New Line Cinema, which subsequently became known as the house that Freddy built. It made $57.1 million worldwide, which would be about $173 million today. So it made quite a bit of money for 1984.
Yeah.
Yeah. As far as 80s horror. So I'm assuming that since you picked a movie from 1984, that you're also a big 80s horror fan. So how would you describe the impact of 80s horror on you as a horror fan?
Well, 80s horror was kind of where I started. Like I was probably like 15 years old when I first started getting into horror. I used to there was a friend I had in high school, and we used to just basically spend the weekends. We'd go to the video store and we'd instantly go to the horror section. And he was the one that actually kind of got me into horror, because he found he watched the Halloween movie for the first time, absolutely loved it, and then so he had me watch it, oh, that was so good. And then we actually watched Nightmare on Elm Street next, and then I was actually kind of surprised by it because I didn't know that it had the premise it did. I thought it was just a guy with a hand, a little claw going around killing people. And I was like, oh, wow, this is completely different.
Yeah.
So we ended up watching the entire series in one weekend, and it was a lot of fun.
So was Nightmare on Elm Street the first horror movie you ever watched?
No, it's not the first one I've watched. It's probably one of the first.
Okay.
I want to say probably the first one I've ever watched was probably Poltergeist. But that movie traumatized me because I was only 10 when I saw it. And I remember the one scene that bothered me was when the guy's picking his face off in the mirror.
Oh my God, yes.
I watched that scene today. I'm just like, oh my God, I was scared by that.
Well, okay, I have to say this though as a side note about Poltergeist. Yeah, I came into that movie pretty late in life, so I didn't have the experience of watching it when I was a kid. But seeing the guy pick his face off just kind of made me cringe. Ew, because anything with faces or eyeballs and stuff like that is one of my squick points. It freaks me out. Oh, geez. I could even to go on a whole side thing about Poltergeist, but let me cycle it back to Nightmare on Elm Street and ask you how this film has influenced you as a horror fan. And do you think it still holds up for you after all these years? I mean, I think it's, if my math is correct, it's 40 years old.
Yeah.
40-year-old movie.
40 years old this year. Or this past year, I guess.
Yeah.
I mean, I just watched it recently just to kind of get a refresher on it. And I mean, yeah, it had a pretty subpar remake come out back in 2010 that I keep forgetting that happened. But yeah, I think it holds up pretty good because it kind of, when it comes to a lot of horror, especially from the 80s, a lot of it's very time focused, so it touches on things that were kind of more relevant at the time, whether it be politics or just social concerns going on at the time. This one deals with more trauma, sleeping. Everybody still sleeps. Sleep is not a past thing. So if you're going into horror for the first time and you watch Nightmare on Elm Street, I'm just like me, I had trouble sleeping the first time I saw it. I was like, is Freddy gonna come kill me in my sleep?
Oh, geez. Yeah, Freddy to me would be a villain that you would just always die from because you have to sleep. I mean, like you said, sleep is not something that was just it's in fashion 40 years ago, but now it's just sleep. It's overrated.
Yeah, right. Well, I mean, I guess nowadays too, I get like 4 hours of sleep now, but
no, yeah, like on a good night, I could probably get about 6 hours, but yeah, just like I think that Freddy, like, I would immediately die. And uh, anyway, so how has this film influenced you as a horror fan with the kind of horror that you watch today?
I mean, I tend to lean more towards like fun, entertaining horror because I feel like if a horror movie tries to go a little bit too seriously and not have fun with itself, it has the risk of like just kind of falling flat. And but like Nightmare on Elm Street 10, like I mean, the first movie I guess was a little bit more on the serious side. The later films went a little bit more like he had more witty one-liners in later movies. He was kind of a jokester a little bit. Where in this one he was kind of more mysterious. We didn't know much about him. I guess it's just Freddy as a character. He's kind of goofy. He was kind of playful. He likes to play with his victims. He always kind of pester them a little bit before he actually killed them. And in a way too, like he also they never actually directly said this or not, but I feel in this one he really set up everything so it made it look like it was something within their world. The scene where what's her name, Tina, when Tina's sleeping with Rod and Freddy attacks Tina in her sleep and everyone thinks Rod killed her because nobody else was in there. So it was a very good, I guess, cloak and dagger is what you would call it. But yeah, no, I know I'm kind of going off track, but fun horror is more like the stuff that I like. Stuff that doesn't take itself seriously. And yeah, that was my introduction to it. I just enjoyed it. It was entertaining.
You did mention that the later films of the franchise, yeah, you got to see more of the really goofy, kind of comedic Freddy. And then this one, it took itself a little bit more, I wouldn't say like overly serious, but it dealt with a lot of heavy themes. It dealt with, you mentioned, trauma. It dealt with the power of fear and how people dealt with fear and their inner demons and the blurred lines even between what's real and what's not. You mentioned a little bit about trauma, but how do you feel that, let's say, trauma, fear, those blurred lines, how do you feel that they're communicated in the story through the characters, through the plot, through Freddy himself?
Probably it's definitely the way that the characters kind of talk about their dreams, because some of them just kind of like Glenn never outright tells anybody that he's having the same dreams as everybody else, despite the fact that he knows that he's having the same dreams as everybody. He didn't want to tell anybody. And then even Nancy, she'll be screaming one thing, and then her mom comes like, "What's wrong? What's wrong?" She's like, "Oh, everything's fine, Mom. Like, it's just fine. I just fell." Shrugging it off as if it's nothing. And you kind of see that, especially with abuse victims. A lot of times they won't talk about what's going on because they're afraid nobody will believe them. And this is a situation where we're dealing with the supernatural, and they're probably afraid that nobody's going to believe them. And then, of course, the parents have something that they're hiding, as was revealed later on. So that obviously they have that disbelief. It's like, no, there's no way he's traumatizing you. We killed him, like we burned his house, we burned his boiler room to the ground. But yeah, it's like stuff like that. It's just how they deal with the whole idea that they're having these nightmares that are like becoming very real.
And I would say Nancy she has to be my favorite character in the whole movie. And I felt that she, besides Freddy, fully embodied the theme of fear, because it's this unknown entity, much like you're having to fight your own inner demons. And then she shows in the movie that just to overcome that fear, instead of hiding from it, you just have to turn around and face it, no matter how hard it could be. Because I love what she told Freddy. She's like, "You're nothing. You're shit."
Yeah.
And that was a really, it was like, yes, like, you go, Nancy.
Yeah.
And this movie also came out during the 80s slasher craze. So there was that big 80s boom. You mentioned earlier that you went to a lot of the video rental stores. So that seems to be a commonality among peoples of the 80s, especially young, like 80s kids. We go to video stores. We go to the horror section. Horror was everywhere in the 1980s, also because of video rental stores. And Nightmare on Elm Street is categorized as a slasher. So the typical slasher usually involves it's a killer. They have a reason sometimes for killing the teenagers. They sometimes don't. They go around killing people with their weapon of choice, and most of the times, they're silent. Sometimes they are, sometimes they're not. Freddy definitely wasn't. But do you feel that Nightmare on Elm Street fits the typical definition of a slasher film, or do you think it brought something new to that subgenre?
Definitely brought something new, because whereas there was Halloween, which was just a killer on Halloween night, fitting in among everybody. Michael was somebody that everybody could see. He walked around the same plane of existence as us. Same with Jason. Jason walks the same plane of existence as everybody else. Freddy was not. He was a part of our subconscious. He attacked us in the world of the dream world, essentially. Now, Nancy was able to pull him into the real world, but that was at the very end of the movie. But for the most part, he's the most powerful, like in the dream world, which I think makes him more terrifying, because he's at the mercy of our whatever we can imagine. He can use that as a weapon again. Like, he can use your own brain as a weapon against you. Your own fears, your own traumas, your own history. He can take people you love and just make them the most terrifying thing to you.
Oh, yes, absolutely. So he uses a lot of psychological warfare against you, against like you, not against like you personally. It's like, he's coming after you. But he uses a lot of psychological warfare just against people. Like you said, like weaponizing even the people that you love and care about. And then I think about the people on the outside that are kind of looking in. You mentioned whenever Rod saw Tina being brutally murdered, and there was really like nothing he could do about it. And then poor Rod, everybody thought that he killed Tina. Yeah. I feel so bad for him.
Yeah, in a way, like, because like it was funny, like he was kind of a jerk to her, and like, but at the same time, he was still kind of harmless. I think, despite the fact that he pulled a knife on Glenn at that one point, but like, he just seemed like somebody who was just like kind of easily irked, but he would never really hurt anybody. He just wanted to act tough.
Mm-hmm. Yep, 80s movies always got to have that like tough guy, that bad boy type character. 80s horror movies, so from what I've seen, you always see like the jerky guy, like wears a leather jacket. So it tracks. It definitely tracks. And speaking of kills, this movie had some very, I would say, creative ones that hadn't been ones I think hadn't been seen before, at least up to this point. There was a lot of new things that they did in this movie, and a lot of new special effects and techniques that they use. Do you, what scene or technique or scares in this film stand out to you as a classic moment in this film? And why do you think that it works so well?
I personally still love to this day, even though like I kind of know how they probably did it, was the bedroom blood fountain from when he killed Glenn. Because obviously we just know that they probably just put a hole in the bed, they put it upside down, they just filmed it upside down and had the blood pour out kind of thing. And I think they did the same method when Tina was on the ceiling. They probably had Rod's actor in front of a blue screen or something, and then they filmed her separately on the floor with like a fake set that make it look like she was on the ceiling. I mean it did some really cool like practical effects, especially, and it still looked pretty good. It didn't look too cheesy or anything. Again, I just watched this movie recently, and the effects hold up pretty good.
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned both of those like scenes, because those are two of my favorite scenes as well, as far as the practical effects. I did a little bit of poking around because I always have to know why somebody does something and how this was created. And it was a rotating room, which was very expensive technology at the time. So they had a way to where they could rotate the room by hand, which I thought was pretty unique, like, and creative. And to me, like, it makes sense because if you're wanting something to not follow the logic of the real world, so they're stuck like in kind of dream world, a rotating room, I guess, would make sense to use that for that kind of effect.
Yeah.
Yep.
I've always been a big fan of practical effects over CGI anyway, so it's that's why I love the 80s too.
Recently did a video just about that, about why practical effects are the best, basically.
I did see that.
Of the video. Yeah, practical effects in horror are the best. But I also want to ask just about the ending of this movie. Some people are just like, what? What the hell? Others are like, oh, okay, well, it makes sense. Are you in the what the hell camp, or are you in the this makes sense camp about the ending?
I mean, I guess I was originally, when I first saw it, I was like, what the hell? Like, because I mean, you did mention like it blurs the lines between like what's real and what's not, kind of thing. When I first saw like the car pull up and like all the dead characters were in it, I was like, oh, wait a minute, did she dream everything? That'd be some like Inception level twists there. And then but then I was like, okay, maybe she's still having a nightmare. Maybe she's still in the nightmare world. I haven't seen the later movies to see what they did with that. I haven't seen them recently, so I don't remember a lot of them. I do know Nancy does come back, I think, in one. Like, I don't think she came back in part 2. It was part 3 or 4, I think she came back.
3, yes.
3, okay. So yeah, I don't know. I don't remember actually what happened with that or what came of that. I was definitely, at first it was what the hell, but now I was like, oh, that makes sense, because I feel like a lot of horror movies do that fake out where you're like, oh, the killer's dead, they saved the day. It was like, no, no.
Psych.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm just glad that they didn't do the whole just like the character is dreaming and then like, oh, it's just a dream. And then they wake up in the dream and then they end up actually like waking up again. I hate the fake out, just like, oh God, it was just a dream.
It was a dream within a dream within a dream.
Yeah, dream within a dream within a dream. Like you said, that's Inception level stuff.
Yeah.
Here's Christopher Nolan level like stuff that would be going on there. But yeah, the more I think about it, it makes sense for me too. I was very much what the hell about it for a very long time. And then I was like, well, that poor girl, Freddy is still like torturing her, made her think that she won. And it's like, ha, no, you didn't. Yeah. Like, that Freddy. And speaking of, I always like to think what if. So speaking of the dream world, you're the latest victim of Freddy Krueger, and he's targeted you for whatever reason, and he's in your nightmares. Do you think that you would survive or how do you think you would survive, if at all?
Oh God. That's a good question because, like, I don't know, like, I feel like he would use my skepticism sometimes for like a lot, like, he would know what I expect out of horror situations. He would use my knowledge of horror against me. And he would create he would create a situation where it's like, if I were to watch a horror movie that just completely surprises me, he would find that like find that movie that surprises me. And I feel I don't think I'd win.
Yeah, I'd like to think because I knew a lot about horror that I would win, but as I mentioned earlier, it's like, no, I think I would be doomed too when it came to Freddy.
It's also the fact too, like, so I recently went to back in October, we went to Nightmare New England, which is like just a collection of haunted houses. And I was just walking through every haunted house and I was like peering around the corner every single time. And I know the scare actor would be there. I'd poke my head around the corner and just start waving at everybody. Like, I was probably the most unfun customer that these people had all day. Because I was just laughing at everything. I was expecting everything to turn the corner. And that's exactly why, like, I would lose because I would see Freddy. I'd be like, ha, 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 you're nothing. And then he'd be like, no, I am. And then he would.
Yeah, like, yes, I am. Ha, gotcha.
He'd kill me with his wet spaghetti glove.
His wet spaghetti glove just slap you in the face with like all the noodles.
Yeah.
And if you had a chance to actually defeat him, I guess like Nancy thought she did, if we're going with the whole she's still stuck in a dream thing. But if you had the chance you figured out how to defeat Freddy, you have to pull him into our world. But to do that, you have to go into the dream world to find him and get him out in our world. Would you risk that if you thought that you could beat him?
I mean, I probably would, yeah. I mean, I like to think that sometimes my imagination can just go to the most outrageous places. And like, I think there's even a meme about Nightmare on Elm Street where people say like, where if Freddy were to visit my nightmares, he'd be more terrified than I am. And like, I just kind of think like I could also use that against him. Like, I could make my imagination just go to the most like darkest corner that I can think of, and that even makes me think, what is wrong with you?
Where you'd be like, oh, I'm getting out of here.
Like, I'm not religious, but I'd probably have to go to confession, like, kind of thing.
Okay.
And I probably still wouldn't be forgiven for these thoughts. Like, I'd use those to get him out.
It's like, be gone, demon.
Yeah, right. In this case, I'd be the demon.
Yeah, you'd be the demon, and you'd be like hunting. You'd be like terrorizing Freddy. There we go.
Exactly.
There's like a twist there. There's a twist there. I mentioned earlier that this film came out 40 years ago, which my math was correct. Yay. And it still blows my mind that this movie is 40 years old and I still hear people talk about it. Like, you're talking about it, say just like, oh, it's one of your absolute favorite horror films. And I still hear like others talk about it. Like, it's at the top of like a lot of people's lists is like their favorite Nightmare on Elm Street films and it's just their favorite horror films, period. So why do you think that a 40-year-old horror movie still resonates with horror fans today?
I think it just came out at a right time. Because I think at the time when it came out, there really wasn't a lot of mascot horror. Because even the Halloween movies, the last Halloween movie that came out, I think was in 1982, which was Halloween 3, which didn't even have Michael in it. And then we didn't see another Michael Myers Halloween movie until 1988 with Halloween 4. So really at the time was only really Jason and Freddy at the time during that. And I think they just really needed something that could go up against Jason. And of course, they made a Freddy versus Jason movie later, which was a fantastic movie.
Yes, it was. It was.
Yeah.
It is. I should say it is.
But like, yeah, and I think that same year is when Friday the 13th Part 4 came out. And that was just Jason's third movie, technically, because he wasn't in Part 1.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, there really wasn't a lot of mascot horror, and like horror started becoming more mainstream during the 80s. And it's because there was a character that they could market, So yeah, I think that's just why it still resonates. It was marketable. I mean, we still see Freddy popping up in things, and we see parodies of him. We see he's in video games.
Yep.
Yeah, it's just one of those long lasting legacies. It's just like, we had a great actor playing him, Robert Englund. He played the part very well. And I remember like I would see toys at the toy store growing up in the 90s. Even he was everywhere. There were posters everywhere, and you see the little hat on him. He was creepy, but he wasn't enough to like scare kids away, because the kids would be like, "What is that? He looks weird," And obviously the parents are like, "No, you're too young for that."
Yeah, you gotta wonder why, now that I'm older, I look back on that. It's like, there is no way they should have been marketing Freddy Krueger to kids. No way, especially considering he is a child killer.
Yeah.
But now they can market him to all just like the adults who were kids in the 80s, and they could buy like all like the NECA figures and all the action figures and all that stuff. I've actually got one of Dream Warriors Freddy on my shelf,
nice.
like a big NECA figure of Dream Warriors Freddy. So yeah, that's my favorite Nightmare on Elm Street film besides this one, actually.
Yeah.
No. And then of course Freddy versus Jason. I still count it as a Freddy film, and I also count it as a Jason film. Now I'll probably have to watch that tonight because you mentioned it.
Yeah, fun little like kind of throwback story about Freddy versus Jason. So I was still I don't think I was very underage for R-rated movies yet, but my friends and I, we saw that. We actually managed to see it in theaters, but we went to this theater, this small theater. It was actually a Lowe's theater. I think it was called Sony Theaters at the time. And they would card you when you bought the tickets, but they would never check your stubs when you're walking into the movie. So we bought tickets for Fast and the Furious, like the very first Fast and the Furious movie. And then we walked into Freddy versus Jason. We were the only people in the theater. And we got away with it.
Oh God, that's sneaky. That's sneaky.
And the funny thing is, we weren't all that sneaky about it, because this was a very small theater. You could see all the auditoriums from the box office, because like the box office was attached to the snack stand. So it was like the box office, the snack stand, and then the area with all the auditoriums. It was like just one room. Okay. And the screens were very small too. So the theater workers watched us walk right into the Freddy vs. Jason. They did absolutely nothing. Then again, these are probably like 18-year-olds in college, making probably $3 an hour at the time. So they didn't care.
No, I probably wouldn't either. But like, oh, okay, well, there's some young people walking to Freddy versus Jason. Okay, have fun.
we weren't that young. I think we were probably like 14 and 15.
Okay, yeah. I noticed that, and that's like it's on the older side, but I noticed that a lot of people, whenever they talked about their first horror movies, like, yeah, I watched it really young. Like I was 6 or 7. Like I think I was how old was I? 6? I was 6 or 7 when I saw my first horror movie. Oh, it's like,
Yeah, I was still too scared of stuff like that when I was 6 or 7. Like I said, like, even at 10, like Poltergeist scared me.
Yeah, I was terrified of Hellraiser because that was the first one that I ever saw, and then it terrified me for like a really long time. Then when I watched it later on, it's just like, oh, okay. I could see like probably why a kid me was scared by this, but adult me is just like, this is awesome, man.
Yeah, it was funny. I remember seeing Hellraiser on the shelf and just seeing like Pinhead's face on the cover and seeing all the needles coming out of him, and I just remember just staring and going, oh. And then I flipped the cover over, and then there's like the bloodied up body on the back sleeve. I was like, oh. And I just put it back and I just got moving on.
It's like, oh yeah, no.
Actually, I think one of the covers actually that didn't scare me, but the box for Pumpkinhead did, because on the back of the box for one of the Pumpkinhead movies, there was a silhouette of him just kind of lurking. That was more creepy to me. And that one, I was like, okay, I'm going to put that away. That one actually gave me some nightmares, seeing the back of the Pumpkinhead box.
Yeah, the movie itself is like really, it's creepy and sad. It's just like a very creepy. Side note for everybody, if you haven't seen Pumpkinhead do it, it's just a very like creepy revenge.
I think I've only seen it like once.
Yeah, see it again. My goodness.
Yeah, I got. There's a lot of stuff I watched like once and then just like never watched it again.
Yeah, I totally get it. Like going back, there's a lot of horror movies that you can go back and revisit, though, and add to your list, your big long list of horror movies.
I did actually add a lot of horror like collections to my Christmas list for my family to get me. Like, and one of them was like the Nightmare on Elm Street collection on Blu-ray, because I have the DVD box set of it, but I don't have it on Blu-ray. And same with like Friday the 13th. I asked for the TV series because I have not seen the Friday the 13th TV series yet. I've always wanted to check it out.
Okay. My family for Christmas, and they asked me like, what, or birthdays, just like, what can I get you? Like, oh, just give me all horror stuff. Like, you know what I like, and here's some movies that I maybe have been wanting, and just like, it's going to be another horror Christmas again, like for me this year. Now I want to ask you just a few quick questions. This is our little, what I like to call like our lightning round. So I got about 5 questions that are related to the movie or to just Nightmare on Elm Street in general. And just say the first answer that pops in your head. So, what do you think is scarier? Freddy's glove, his finger knife glove, or his laugh?
Definitely his glove.
Yeah.
Because I definitely remember seeing that and be like, that looked like it would hurt. And also, it's I also one of the jokes my friend and I would make was, could you imagine wiping with the wrong hand?
No. Jeez, yeah. Like, just remember, it's I always forget what hand he wears it on. Like, I don't know directions, but
might be on his right. I don't know if he was dominant. It would definitely be on his dominant hand.
Yeah. He's even like on my shirt, and it looks like it's his it's his right hand. Yeah. Okay. I had to look down at my shirt to like figure out what hand that he was wearing his glove on. Now, as far as facing Freddy, ideally we would not want to face him at all. But if you had to face him, would you rather face him in the dream world or in the real world?
Honestly, it just depends on how strong your mind is, I guess. If you're very weak-minded, if you can't if you cave under pressure very easily, you'd probably want to take him on in the real world. But if you can keep your mind strong, you can turn your mind against him. Like I said, just go to the deepest, darkest place that I can think of that would scare even Freddy. To make like, okay, I'm out of here. Like this kid's just no.
Very diplomatic answer. I
Yeah.
like that. No. What is your favorite Freddy one-liner? So it could be from this movie. It could be from any of the other movies.
It was in part 4. It's when he kills the kid in the waterbed, and he says, "How's this for a wet dream?" I actually have I met Robert Englund at a Monster Mania convention back in, I think, 2017. And he actually signed a poster for part 4, and he actually wrote that quote on it for me. So
that is awesome.
Yeah.
That is awesome.
If I had it with me, I'd show it, but
yeah, that just, I can just imagine that. That's just so cool. That's so cool.
Yeah.
And what do you think is scarier, the way that Freddy looks or the psychological torment that he uses on his victims?
Definitely a psychological torment. Like, from the scene where Nancy's in school after learning that, or just after seeing her best friend, her mangled body on the floor, she goes back to school, and then she falls asleep in class, and she is haunted by her friend in the body bag, and then seeing her dragged through the hallways of her high school. I can't imagine just seeing that happen.
Yeah, I think that would traumatize me for life. Like if I even dreamed that. Oh. Now the last question is, besides this movie, so besides Nightmare on Elm Street, what is your absolute favorite Nightmare on Elm Street film?
It's tough because I love meta horror. So Wes Craven's New Nightmare, fantastic. But I love cheesy. I love over the top. So Freddy versus Jason is another favorite.
Yeah, I would have to. Dream Warriors will always be my number one. It's my number one. No. Yeah. All of them are, they're good in one way or another, but that one's always going to be my favorite. And just, yes, you keep mentioning Freddy versus Jason. Now I am definitely going to have to watch that tonight. It's like subliminal messages. Freddy versus Jason. Freddy versus Jason.
Yeah.
Well, I want to thank you so much for coming on, for diving into Nightmare on Elm Street with me, talking about just why this movie absolutely rocks, because it does. Mm-hmm. So do you have any last thoughts on why horror fans should watch this film? Like, maybe it's been a while since they've seen it, or maybe they haven't even seen it yet. So why should people watch this movie?
Well, it's definitely inspired a lot of just modern horror. Like, Terrifier was like, this was a big, like, you can even see it like in Art the Clown's body language. You can see, like, you put Freddy and Art side by side, and I like to say that Art the Clown is basically Freddy Krueger if he didn't talk. And like, I was even like watching this, and I was seeing things like, even like the very beginning of Nightmare on Elm Street is basically almost the same thing as what, like, Terrifier basically took that beginning montage where we're watching Freddy build his glove. We're watching Art the Clown build his weapons. And like in the workshop, we're not getting any, good glimpses of him. We're just getting tight shots of just bits and pieces of his face. You don't see his whole body all together. And then just down to just like the I'm trying to think. Just even like some pop culture, like Rick and Morty's riffed on it with the character Scary Terry.
Scary Terry.
And you can play as it's not Robert Englund's Freddy, but you can play as Jackie. What's his name? The guy who played him in the remake. You play
Jackie
as Freddy.
Earl Haley.
Yeah, you play as him in Dead. You can play as him in Dead by Daylight. And he's actually a very fun killer to go against too.
Yes, he is. He really is.
Yeah, it's just like it's and I'm sure like there's definitely more inspirations, like just very subtle, very, very subtle stuff. Just kind of thrown into different movies here and there. Yeah, it's just and also just it's just a fun series. A lot of like just very fun, memorable moments. And I think it's just a great kind of horror 101 kind of thing.
Yeah, if you want to see a lot of the inspiration, where it all began, then a lot of 80s horror movies, and if you will go back, even 70s horror movies laid the groundwork for a lot of the stuff that we see today. So yeah, I'm definitely with you. I would recommend just watching that if you want to see where certain like tropes and stuff all began. So before we go, I would like to ask you to tell everybody where they can find you besides going around and hollering out your name. Where can people find you and what you do? And is there anything that you have coming down the pipeline that people should keep an eye out for?
You can find me on twitch.tv/JaseInvader. And as for like big projects, you can find me on I do a little trying to find a best way to describe this. It is a comedy gaming trivia show with some friends of mine called Low Res. You can find that on YouTube. It's LOWREZ. So you'll find me. I'm not on every episode, but you'll find me on a few episodes of that. And I'm sure you'll find I got so many ideas up here. Whether or not I find the time to execute them, but best way to keep tabs is I have an Instagram, I have Blue Sky, and I have a Threads. So you can find me on any of those. And I usually keep people up to date on any projects I'm doing.
And they can find you on all those as JaseInvader.
Yeah, Instagram is JaseInvader15. There's a weird story behind that. I lost access to my original account, so I had to add a number.
Okay. Well, all right. So that's where people can find you, and people can keep an eye out on what you're doing and all the cool horror stuff and games and stuff that you will play. So to everybody, thank you so much for watching this episode of Retro Horror School Talks. Like, subscribe, and share with fellow horror fans if you want to learn more about horror and dive into your favorite horror movies. Class is dismissed, everybody. I'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye, everyone.